The blue lights came on at 11:14 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. Deputy Marcus Pruitt had been working the stretch of Highway 9 between Millhaven and the county line for 3 years, and before that, 7 years on the same stretch under a different patrol assignment. And in 10 years, he had developed what his colleagues called instinct, and what the evidence, when it finally came, would call something else entirely. He pulled over a silver sedan with clean plates, current registration, no visible violations, the kind of stop that required a reason. And the reason Pruitt used was a rolling stop at the junction of Route 9 and Millhaven Creek Road, which had no camera coverage and no witnesses and was close enough to true on enough nights that it had served him reliably for a decade. The woman in the driver's seat was 44 years old, calm, and unhurried about reaching for her license and registration. She had been pulled over before. She knew the shape of what was coming. What she also knew, what Pruitt could not have known, could not have checked in the 12 seconds between seeing her face and deciding to switch on the lights, was that the recorder on her phone had been running since mile marker 7:18 minutes earlier, when she had made a decision that would take 10 years of night stops and turn them into a federal case. Pruitt walked to her window. The recorder ran. 2 months earlier. This is where it starts. Dr. Renata Okafor had heard the stories for years. Every black driver in Millhaven County had Highway 9 after dark, the stretch between the county seat and the eastern townships where most of the county's black residents lived, had a reputation that moved through community networks the way reputations move when institutions won't carry them, quietly, specifically, person to person. The stop, the flashlight in the face, the invented violation, the suggestion, delivered in the reasonable tone of a man with a badge, and the authority to complicate your evening, that a donation to the deputy's discretionary goodwill, cash, always cash, usually between $60 and $200, would resolve the matter more efficiently than a court date. If you refused, you got the ticket. Sometimes more than one ticket. If you pushed back, you got a search that lasted long enough to make you late for wherever you were going, and left your car looking like it had been looked through, which it had. And then you drove home and told the people you knew, and they told the people they knew, and the knowledge spread, and the stops continued, because knowledge without evidence is just a story, and stories don't make federal cases. Renata was a forensic accountant. She had spent 22 years following money through the places it tried to hide. Corporate fraud, insurance schemes, embezzlement structures that their architects had believed were invisible, until she sat down with the records and started asking the records what they knew. She was precise, patient, and constitutionally incapable of allowing a pattern to exist in her vicinity without mapping it. She had a saying she used with junior colleagues who got frustrated by slow investigations. The money always leaves a mark. Your job is to find the mark before the mark finds someone else. She had been pulled over on Highway 9 3 years earlier, before she understood what the stop was. She had paid $60 in cash to a deputy who told her, pleasantly, that it would simplify things. She'd driven home with the specific shame of a transaction she hadn't consented to and a badge number she'd written on the back of a gas receipt. And then, when she couldn't prove anything, filed in her center console and tried not to think about. She had thought about it ever since. 18 months ago, her neighbor's 20-year-old son had been stopped on Highway 9. He had no cash. The deputy, same badge number, she would later confirm, had issued him 3 citations totaling $412, one of which required a court appearance he couldn't afford to miss work for. The family had come to Renata the next morning, sitting in her kitchen, with a receipt for the citation fees they'd eventually paid, and the particular exhaustion of people who have absorbed something wrong and cannot find the mechanism to push back against it. Renata had looked at the receipt. She had thought about the $60. She had thought about the gas receipt in her center console with the badge number on the back, which she had never thrown away. She had gone to her office and opened a new file. What she built over the following 18 months was not dramatic. It was methodical. She posted discreetly in 2 neighborhood networks, asking anyone who had been stopped on Highway 9 between Millhaven and the county line by a deputy matching the description to contact her privately. 41 people responded over 6 months. She interviewed each of them in her home, at their homes, at the library's private study rooms, wherever they were most comfortable, with a legal pad, a recorder, and the practiced neutrality of someone who had spent 2 decades taking testimony that would eventually need to hold up to scrutiny. She asked for dates, times, badge numbers were noted, amounts paid, citations issued, vehicle descriptions. She asked them to rate their certainty. She asked them what they had done with the money they had paid. She asked if anyone still had receipts, records, anything written down. 23 of the 41 had something documented. Receipts from ATM withdrawals made before or after stops, calendar entries, text messages to spouses or friends sent immediately after the stop. One woman had a voicemail she'd left herself in her car while still shaking, a practice she'd started after her first stop and never quit. Renata cataloged everything. She built a timeline on a spreadsheet she kept on an encrypted drive, color-coded by evidence quality. Green for documented, yellow for corroborated memory, red for single-source recall. She ran it across 10 years of dates and found the pattern immediately, because patterns of this kind are never as hidden as their architects believe. They only appear hidden because the people who could see them have been given no mechanism to make them visible. 41 stops over 10 years, 23 with documentation, 39 of the drivers black, 2 white drivers who had been let off with verbal warnings, no citation, no mention of donations. Information she had only because both of those drivers were married to black women who had heard the Highway 9 stories and told their husbands, who had then connected what had happened to them with what hadn't happened and understood the comparison. She interviewed both of them. Both cooperated. Both were certain. She mapped the geography, every stop within a 2-mile radius of the same junction, Route 9 and Millhaven Creek Road. A junction with no streetlights, no traffic cameras, no residential windows facing the road shoulder. She mapped the timing between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m., concentrated on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, when Pruitt's shift pattern put him on that stretch without a regular patrol partner. She cross-referenced his posted shift schedule, public record available on the department's community transparency portal, with the dates her witnesses provided. 27 of the 41 stops fell on Pruitt's confirmed shift nights. The remaining 14 she could not confirm through the schedule alone, but the badge number her witnesses had recorded matched on 19 of them, and the remaining incidents matched the description too precisely to be attributed to coincidence. She ran the estimated cash totals on the documented stops alone and arrived at a conservative floor of $14,000 over the documented period. Extrapolated across the likely full decade, accounting for stops that had never been reported to her and witnesses she had never reached, the number climbed toward 40,000. She built the extrapolation model 3 times using different conservative assumptions and got the same range each time. She looked at the number for a long time. Then she looked at the 41 names on her interview list. Then she called a civil rights attorney named Patricia Hollis, who had an office 20 miles away in the state capitol and a practice that specialized in exactly this category of documented systemic misconduct. Patricia had been waiting for a call like this for years. Not this specific call. She received calls like this regularly from people with pieces of stories and fragments of evidence that were real but not yet actionable. What she had never received was a call from a forensic accountant who had spent 18 months building a documented case with a timeline, a geographic pattern, a financial analysis, and 23 pieces of corroborating evidence before picking up the phone. How solid is the documentation? Patricia asked. Solid enough that I wouldn't have called you if it wasn't, Renata said. Patricia was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? I need to know the threshold for a federal civil rights complaint, and I need to know whether what I have crosses it. Patricia reviewed the materials over 2 days. She called back on a Thursday morning. It crosses it, she said, but we need one more thing. I know, Renata said. We need a contemporaneous recording, a clean one, unambiguous. I know, Renata said again. I'm working on it. Here's what she was working on. Pay close attention. The problem with the existing documentation was that it was retrospective. Every piece of evidence described something that had already happened, filtered through memory and subsequent reconstruction. Strong, corroborated, consistent, but a skilled defense attorney would argue time degradation on every piece. What Patricia needed, and what Renata understood with the precision of someone who had spent 22 years making evidence cases, was something made in the moment, something that needed no reconstruction because it had never been anything other than what it was. She needed the stop documented as it happened. She drove Highway 9 3 nights in a row first, recorder running from mile marker 7 each time, to establish that she was a regular user of that road. At those hours, that the route was part of her normal pattern. She drove at the limit. She stopped fully at every junction, including Millhaven Creek Road, with deliberate thoroughness. She noted the darkness at the junction, the absence of any camera infrastructure, the precise angle at which a driver's window faced the road when pulled to the shoulder. She drove the third night with Patricia on the phone until mile marker 4, the attorney documenting the call log for the record, and then drove the remaining stretch alone with the phone running. On the fourth night, she checked the recorder twice before she left her driveway. She placed it on the passenger seat in a position she had tested at home, angled slightly toward the driver's window, the microphone sensitivity adjusted for road noise. She had the license and registration already organized on top of her bag, accessible without reaching. She checked her speed twice at the Route 9 junction. She stopped fully at Millhaven Creek Road. She continued south at exactly the limit. At 11:14 p.m., the blue lights came on. She did not react. She pulled to the shoulder with smooth, unhurried precision, the way she had practiced. She moved the phone to the passenger seat in the tested position. She put the car in park. She breathed once, slowly the way she breathed before she walked into a deposition room. She had been in many deposition rooms. She had been in rooms where the other side was prepared and certain and had spent years constructing a version of events. She had always found the same thing in those rooms. The truth was there, waiting under the construction, and her job was simply to remove what covered it. She was good at that job. Pruitt's flashlight hid her face through the window. License and registration. She handed them over without speaking. He took them to his cruiser. She sat with her hands on the wheel and the recorder running in the particular stillness of someone who has chosen to be exactly where they are. He was gone for 4 minutes. She counted, and then he was back at her window, flashlight angled into her face. She looked at the light without flinching. She had practiced this too, in a mirror. For reasons she hadn't articulated to herself until she was doing it, she wanted her face, if it was ever seen by anyone, to look like the face of someone who had nothing to fear from the light. "Do you know why I stopped you tonight?" "I'm not sure," she said. Her voice was even, a neutral register she had practiced in her car for 3 nights running. Rolling stop at the Creek Road junction. He handed back her documents. Casual, familiar. The tone of someone who had run this opening 50 times and knew exactly where it led. "You're in a hurry tonight?" "I wasn't, actually." "Ma'am, I clocked it." He said it pleasantly, with the ease of a line he had delivered many times before, a line that acknowledged the dispute and preempted it simultaneously, delivered with the confidence of a man who had never once been challenged on it in a venue that mattered. "Now, I can run this through formal channels, which is going to mean a court date, fee schedule, the whole process. Or we can handle it informally." He paused in the practiced way. "Let the offer sit. Informally is simpler, for both of us." The recorder ran. "What does informal look like?" Renata asked. She needed him to say it clearly. She had listened to enough recordings in 22 years to know the difference between implied and stated, and she needed it stated. He told her, the same shape it had always taken, she knew. For 10 years on this road, cash the amount dependent on variables only he weighed, the transaction completed at the window in the dark, no record drive on. He said it with the smoothness of routine. He had said it, she calculated, approximately 300 times in 10 years, and not once had the math come out wrong for him. "Until now, I don't think I'll be doing that," Renata said. He stiffened. The flashlight moved, a small adjustment she recognized as a reset, the slight repositioning that preceded the escalation. "Ma'am, I'd like a receipt for any fine you issue," she said, "and your badge number for my records, please." A beat of silence. The flashlight held on her face. "You got a problem tonight?" "No problem," she said. "I'd just like the formal process, please, as you offered." He looked at her for a long moment. The darkness behind his expression was doing calculations she could not see, but had anticipated. He had no camera on him. Millhaven County had voted down body cameras in the last budget cycle, a fact Renata had verified as part of her research. His cruiser's dash cam covered the rear of her vehicle, not the window exchange. He had, as far as he could determine, no exposure. He issued her a citation for the rolling stop, $112. He wrote it out with the same calm with which he did everything, tore it from the pad, handed it through the window. "Court date's on there," he said. "Have a good night." He walked back to his cruiser. Renata waited until he had pulled out and his taillights had disappeared around the long curve south of the creek road. Then she picked up her phone. The recorder was still running. She said the date, the time, her location, and her name. She said, "The stop began at 11:14 p.m., and the solicitation of cash occurred at approximately 11:19 p.m. The deputy's badge number as displayed was 4,471. I did not pay. The citation issued was for a rolling stop I did not commit." She said it in the flat, clinical voice of someone making a record, because that was what she was doing. She drove to Patricia Hollis's office the next morning with the recording. Patricia listened to it twice. Then she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We're ready." The federal civil rights complaint was filed jointly with the state attorney general's office. 6 weeks later, it named Deputy Marcus Pruitt individually and the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department institutionally. It included the 41-person testimony file, the 23 pieces of corroborating documentation, the financial analysis mapping estimated cash extraction over 10 years, the geographic and temporal pattern analysis, and a recording made on the night of October 14th on Highway 9 at mile marker 11, which documented an unsolicited offer to resolve a traffic stop through cash payment made by a uniformed county deputy to a civilian motorist on a public road. The Sheriff's Department received the complaint at 9 a.m. on a Monday. By noon, Deputy Pruitt had been placed on administrative suspension. By Wednesday, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit had opened a parallel inquiry. By the following Monday, 3 additional former deputies who had worked the Highway 9 corridor had been identified in the case materials and placed under investigation. Pruitt's attorney issued a statement calling the charges politically motivated. The statement did not address the recording. Statements rarely address the things that make them unnecessary. The trial took 14 months. 21 of the 41 witnesses testified. The recording was played in court, clean, unambiguous, exactly what Patricia had said it needed to be, exactly what Renata had built it to be. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Deputy Marcus Pruitt was convicted on 4 federal counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, extortion under color of official right, civil rights conspiracy, and obstruction. He was sentenced to 63 months in federal prison. The sentence was handed down on a Tuesday morning in the same courthouse where he had worked for 10 years, in a county where people had driven home late at night for a decade with $60 missing from their wallets, and a story that nobody with authority had ever wanted to hear. They heard it now. The Millhaven County Sheriff's Department entered into a consent decree with the State Attorney General's office that required body cameras for all patrol deputies within 90 days, an independent oversight board with civilian membership, and mandatory reporting to the state for all roadside cash transactions or informal stop resolutions. A category the consent decree defined with a specific, deliberate language of people who had learned exactly what that category looked like when it existed and hadn't been named. Patricia Hollis held a press conference on the courthouse steps after the verdict. She thanked the 21 witnesses who had testified. She thanked the additional 20 who had provided documentation. She said the case had been built by a community that had been telling the truth for 10 years and had finally found the mechanism to be heard. A reporter asked who had initiated the case. Patricia paused. She looked at Renata Okafor, who was standing at the edge of the group in a gray coat, watching the courthouse steps with the expression of a woman who has seen a case close. Renata shook her head slightly. "Just once. Just enough. A community member who prefers not to be named," Patricia said. 6 months after the verdict, Renata was at her desk at 7 in the morning with a case file open and a coffee that had gone cold. She had 3 active cases: a corporate embezzlement matter in the Eastern District, an insurance fraud referral from the state insurance commissioner, and a new file that had arrived the previous week from a county 2 hours north. A pattern of irregular municipal fines concentrated in predominantly black neighborhoods, flagged by a community organizer who had been keeping a spreadsheet for 2 years. She looked at the spreadsheet for a long time. It was the beginning of something. She could see the shape of it already, the pattern visible in the data, the way patterns always became visible once she knew how to look. She opened a new file on her computer. She labeled it with the county name and a date. She started typing. The money always leaves a mark. Your job is to find the mark before the mark finds someone else. She had 41 names in a file that had become a federal case. She had a recording that had run for 18 minutes on a dark road before the lights came on and had not stopped running until the matter was finished. She had the specific knowledge, earned across 22 years and one October night on Highway 9, that the distance between a wrong thing continuing and a wrong thing ending was most often not a matter of courage, or resources, or even time. It was a matter of someone deciding to build the thing that would end it, carefully and completely before they made the call. She had made the call. She had been ready when she made it. That was all it had ever required. Outside, the morning was coming up gray and clean over the city, and somewhere on a stretch of highway in Millhaven County, the lights of a deputy's cruiser were switched on at a junction with no cameras and no witnesses, and the driver at the wheel was wearing a body camera, and the recording was already running, and the world that had existed on that road for 10 years was over. Renata typed the first line of the new file. She kept going.